Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Welcome, everyone, to the asylum. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, welcome back. It's the Healthy Dialogue podcast, number 45. Today, we have diversity and accepting differences. Now, if you guys have remembered about little me, I went to San Francisco over the past week. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have a podcast on Saturday, not yesterday, like last Saturday, about a music album that we were supposed to go for. And I got the word out late, excuse me, but I sent a message out on Discord saying that we wouldn't have one on that night. Okay, I thought I was gonna sneeze, but I didn't. But we were supposed to have a music discussion podcast on last Saturday, and the problem ended up being that Alon didn't want to do a album of the same genre of one that we've already done. However, I already put it in the perspective that we'll have like repeating ones, but that didn't convince him to still do it. So we'll be on the lookout for some other ones in the meantime. I've also been thinking about doing like an EDM one as well. So, oh my god. Wow, it's already it's already a problem. I didn't start it in the Discord. I just started it on YouTube. Oops. Well, now we're here. And hopefully we're good. I'm gonna move my sensitivity a little bit. Figure out where it needs to be. Okay. So we have a bunch to talk about today. And actually I conjured up most of the outline for today in the last like 2 hours. But I was thinking about it on the plane ride back. And just a heads up, I did fly back today. So excuse me if I'm a little jet lagged for this podcast, but I think I'm ready. I think I'm capable. And like I generated some dialogue in my head of what to say during this one. Most of it actually, truthfully, was conjuring up a idea topic for what we would do for this podcast. I thought I was gonna not do it, but here we are. Generated something. It's quite large. And actually I generally had a lot to talk about. I just didn't know how to conform it into a specific topic for today. In other news, I'm starting work tomorrow. So if I end up being too overburdened with responsibility for the next podcast, we may not have one next week. I imagine that won't be the case though. I think I should be okay going into my responsibilities, my work responsibilities, to where I should be able to generate some content for next week. Future travel plans. I don't actually know. Like the way that I went through to like the San Francisco vacation is I set out like a week for me to go do it. And there were a lot of problems with that. Like I had to figure out a rental car situation, and oh my god, prices are crazy. Specifically for like younger people too. Like I still fit under, as a 25-year-old, I still fit under a younger audience to where I'm penalized for trying to rent a car at the age of 25. Like there was a deal where I was gonna get like a car for $150 around that price, and it was like with fees plus like the daily rental certain like fee, whatever. So in total, it was supposed to be around like 150. But then young driver fee kicks in, and it's notching up my price by like double that. It's like, really? Bro, I'm just trying to fucking rent a car, man. Like, you can't just not trust every 25 and under year old person and just give them like 2 times the natural fee just because they're what you deem underage and risky to be giving cars to. It's like if they wreck the car, they wreck the car. Just make them pay it. You know, that's already damning enough. Why do you have to add like more fees on top of that? But whatever. I mean, these companies got it figured out, I guess. Just sucking the life out of young adults. That's what they do. That's what they do. But yeah, I also had to figure out like a living situation for a whole week as well. And I stayed at an Airbnb and it was $36 a night. That's a steal. Only problem was I was like an hour away from San Francisco, so every time I had to get my ass on over there, it was a travel, man. And I had to like transfer between like shuttle stations. I took a shuttle. It's like Seattle has one, San Francisco has one, all the way out to like the East Bay area. And I met some very interesting characters. It's not that I even met them. I saw interesting characters there. And that was it's also part of why this topic was brought about for today. But I did get to see my San Francisco friends. Much different culture in San Francisco than it is in Seattle. But then again, I don't really necessarily live in Seattle anyways, so can I really speak on Seattle culture? Probably not. I can speak on like outside areas, like less populated cities on the outskirts of Seattle. So it's probably what I could talk about. But that's normally where I think that's pretty much where I would want to live anyways. It's like have a close enough travel time, like a pleasantly far travel time over to some populated cities. There's some like high density cities. And then just, you know, on my own terms, go visit them. So, and have like the public transportation as well. Like I utilized so much public transportation during that. I absolutely hated using Uber though. Like using Uber just felt like ass. Something that I'd just drive out to do. It's like a very common 2.5 mile drive turns into $10 with Uber. It's like, fuck. Dude, I hated traveling for that reason. The whole reason why I got the rental car was just so I didn't have to pay $10 every fucking time I wanted to go do something that was like less than 2.5 miles away. And I drove to so many places. I ended up like going over 100 miles on the rental car. And just a quick note, what I did the U-Haul method. I saw somewhere that like U-Haul was the way to go because they don't have like a young driver service fee, but I think the trade-off is that you may be renting a car, like a truck out for a long time, and the price of it is actually pretty low. The problem is the mileage and how much you like drive that damn thing. And so I driven it like maybe over 110, which I prepaid like 100 miles for. I just needed to pay like the extra $10 this morning to the guy. Luckily, like nothing else was like bad, so I didn't have like any other fees on top of that. But I did also have to like pay for gas up to the specific point at which I like received the truck with. So it was like 3/4 of a tank, so I had to like pay like a quarter or a third, probably more closer to a third, just to get it back up and running. What else happened? Well, okay, there were 2 very problematic events that happened while I was at San Francisco that guilt me with some level of, well, I don't know, it's not necessarily guilt, but like I'm reminded by it because they were like big events that happened in San Francisco, and they weren't even like related to like things that I set up for myself. They were like things that happened around me that I had some control over. And I actually talked about this in the Discord. If any listener who isn't convinced that the Discord's a good place to be, you get updates on what we do, you get some content discussions over different things that I have to speak about, or you can even like talk about what you want to talk about. Though I don't think anyone's necessarily utilized that yet. I should honestly try and get more people chatting in there, because I know everyone's passionate about something. Like one of the owners is super passionate about like climate change and renewable energy. He just hasn't said anything yet. One of these days I'm gonna get him to talk. He did already talk, actually. It's just he hasn't talked about like the things that he's passionate about. And like part of that is like on myself, right? Like I'm the one responsible for not having the perfect setup for this platform for people to utilize. Which I keep talking about this, so I'm not gonna like speak on it again. But join the Discord. I want it to be better. And I want other people in here as well, so that they can chat about what's passionate about them, or what is passionate to them. I try and talk about like what I want, like the things that I'm passionate about, like the problems that I experience. So I ran into 2 problems while I was there, and one was on the night of the 4th of July. And what ended up happening is that I took the whole shuttle back to where, like, the East Bay area from San Francisco. Like, I had a great time, and you know, for some reason I forgot that like drunk drivers exist. And so when I went back to the car and I was like driving at midnight, I got myself in. I was like at an intersection. There were like 2 rows of cars ahead of me on like both the lane I was in and like the lane to the right of me. And once it turned green, the very first car in the right lane side just sped forward. It's like going like, I don't know, 60 on a 30-mile-per-hour road. He actually wasn't the problem. What the real problem was the car 2 cars ahead of me in the left lane. And he saw, I can't speak on behalf of what he actually saw, but like once the guy on the right hand side just like started sprinting forward, the guy on the left just like sped up and rammed like straight on into like some buildings onto the right side. So it's not like it was at an intersection. Like we had gone past the intersection at that point as people were flooring it. And this guy just decides to speed up, start turning into the side of a building. And I was like, what the fuck? And I'm pretty sure the multiple cars around me were also like, what the fuck just happened? So I think at the moment, most everyone just wanted to get off the road. After seeing that, any one of us around us could have like gone berserk at that point if we were also drunk and just lost it at that point in time. But no, like right after the crash happened, which we all got to see, there's a very disgusting smell like afterwards. It's just burning. Like the front side of the car was definitely damaged enough to have like something spill out that shouldn't be spilling out. So it smelled terrible. Things weren't like it. The car wasn't on fire by the time like it hit the tree. It was like going into a building, but thankfully there was a tree in the way to not like disturb anybody who was currently in the building at the time. But yeah, I just felt like I needed to get out of there. Like once I saw that all happen, and everyone else I think had the same idea. I think people started calling like once they got like a safe distance away. But for me, I just kept on driving home because because the place I was staying at was like maybe a 7-minute drive. So I didn't have too far to go, and I just kind of trusted everyone else had like, you know, something that they were doing. The thing is that I've never seen that in Seattle. Well, not actually. Like I've seen it like on occasion. You've seen disasters happen before, obviously. But the frequency at which I saw those was like non-existent. How was it in the 1 week that I was in the San Francisco area that I get to witness some guy just turn into the side of a building? I mean, granted, it's July 4th, so, you know, I mean, July 4th happens once a year. But that's wild, man. That's real wild. Later on in the week, I was taking the shuttle back. This is This is occasion number 2. I was taking the shuttle back and I saw this guy. Or actually, no, I didn't even see this guy. I was at a transfer part. So I'd take a shuttle and then I had to transfer off of it to continue going down to where my Airbnb was. And at that transfer, we all got off of it. And apparently like a couple like carts ahead of me, there was this group of like 5 or 6 people, I can't remember. I think it's 5. One of them was drunk as shit. And I didn't notice that until I saw him in the railway, or like on top of the railway, which is like a 4-foot drop, right? So when you're looking at these shuttles, like usually usually you're not supposed to go like near the railway, but this guy somehow ended up down there, and I don't think the group really realized what had happened, or were like unsure of what he hit, because that guy was totally out of it. Not only was he drunk, it didn't occur to me that he even like hit his head. Like he seemed decently functional enough to at least be moving. If he hit something like critical, he would be dead or like down on the ground. He wouldn't be able to like move anything at all. But it is possible that he hit his head like so hard that like he wouldn't be able to do anything like functional. But we just all assumed that he wasn't functional because he was drunk. But so that happened, and what we had to do to get him out was drag him out pretty much. Like he lifted his arms up. He had some understanding that he was in like some deep shit when he was down there. So at the very least, he understood that much. But he like reached his arms up kind of aimlessly, and we had to drag him all the way out of that. There was like 3 of us that were doing that too. So yeah, that's how useless he was for getting himself out of that situation. The only reason I saw that pretty much happen after the fact is because the whole group was like yelling at him. And that's just it's like they kind of knew that he was drunk, but they didn't do anything about it. It's like if I was drunk, I'd want competent people to prevent me from doing something harmful to myself. And that group did exactly the opposite of of what like someone who is drunk should be like surrounded by. And I think they were all like younger folks too. The guy I think was older. He was one of the brothers of one of the women, or I guess girls. To be honest, they all looked underage to me, including the guy who was drunk. So, but they all looked like young and pretty incompetent in the situation. And everyone was like looking over after the fact, because like me and several of the group members ended up pulling him out, but it didn't look like anyone else was willing to run over there and help out what was the poor guy. So the group ended up just like sitting him down, but like continued to yell at him. Thankfully, nothing else came of that, but like the whole time was just a scene before like the next shuttle came up. He was laying on the ground. He was spitting everywhere. His pants down to his ankles. Like everyone was looking at him, and the whole group was like embarrassed that this poor drunk man was just like in such a shitter position. But I've kind of concluded that nobody would really care if there was a drunk person that was being like taken care of well. I think everyone else was looking at the incompetence of the younger folk of the group who didn't do anything that they should have done to prevent the situation from escalating into something fatal. Because that's what it was. Like, the guy just fell onto the railroad of the shuttle. And thankfully there wasn't like any other shuttles coming for the next 5 minutes, but shoulda, coulda, woulda. You don't want to ever be in that situation. That's some shit. But part of the reason why I wanted to do diversity and accepting differences today is because it's hard to look at that same group. It's hard to look at the drunk driver and say, do they really need to do that? Which is like it's a terrible question to ask. Because what if they really did need to like set themselves up in an environment where they were meant to fail? Why would you take drinking so far? Drinking or drugs or anything that would make you so incapable of driving on a road normally, or so out of it that you put yourself in almost fatal danger. How do you even let your friend go to that level of intoxication and then not be competent enough to look after them? Like, how do you accept the difference of that? Do you just assume that they're going through so much shit that that's the only reason why they would do that? I'm not much of a drinker myself, and partly because that drinking doesn't do me. Or maybe I don't do drinking very well. It's either one of the two. But I'm not much of a drug person because I don't necessarily see myself as someone who necessarily needs to have the getaway from reality. I think I take in life as I do. I think I go act when I need to. I think I'm proud of what I do. With these other people, I don't know. There's a social element to it, just fitting in, but I don't feel a need to fit in the same way that they do. Either way, I think it's probably okay to just say that what they did was needed at the time for their existence. And if they really don't like what they did, they could just not do it again. That is, if the guy who slammed his car into the side of a building is still alive. I'm hoping they are. I'm assuming it's a he, but definitely could be a woman too. I'm hoping they're alive. I'm also hoping that the drunk guy is also alive. All right, enough backstory time about my trip, about two very specific instances that weren't even why I was there in San Francisco to begin with. Imagine having to deal with that though. Like, the situation I was put up with, I pretty much, like, I just want to be there for a vacation, right? And all of a sudden, I have people around me who are just putting themselves through hell. For what? Making everyone else be like uncomfortable around them. It's rough, dude. I don't even know. We're gonna move on. So usually, like, diversity is talked about as I think it's pretty popular for today to speak on behalf of like company ethics or like company achievement. Like, you want diversity within your company in order to have better outcomes, like better company deliverables. You want to have diversity so that you can be inclusive, make like a liberal virtue signaling stance to the world that your company is better than everyone else because we have diversity, which is a very shallow way of me to portray like what diversity actually is. Like diversity generally has a lot of benefits to it, and I can speak to that on a personal and a academic manner, because I guess some story that I have to share, that I think a lot of people have heard. Like everyone's heard the story. Well, it's not that everyone, but there's a common story of like people developing, like a company developing like a hand sanitizing product, and it just like auto senses when you put your hand under it. And the problem with the product that they developed is that it wasn't able to detect like black pigmentation. So if like a black person was to like put their hand underneath the motion sensor or the sensor in general, they weren't able to identify and dispense soap for that person, which is a major like flaw, right? And how would that happen? It's because the group that was developing this product didn't have the diversity within the group to have that foresight of that problem. And so naturally, if they had like someone who had black pigmentation in their group, they would have developed a product that would have been more usable by a greater population. So not only would its practical effects be better for like a sales standpoint, because more people would be able to use it, but actually no, that's really about it. So I think a lot of downsides to not having diversity on your team when you're generating different products is that you're unable to see all the different sides at which your product could be used by diverse populations. And so having that group be in the production cycle of the production process of any product would enable a greater audience at which your product could be applied to. So there's obviously that one, and there's like different ways that there's actually a lot of academic research done about how products end up being delivered better and team dynamic ends up being better through diversity. Actually, I'm not so confident about that last one. I'm confident about the first one though. Okay, but for me, instead of having that like political, there's also the added reason that some people want like diversity as like to be like representative of the population. So people would want to say in like colleges that you need a better diverse student population, one that represents like the population better. So having like quotas of 11% of black people to represent the population, or whatever, like however local you want to take that. And so you also have those like politically driven agendas for diversity, which I don't think necessarily does it any good if it's all forced. Because I think at least with academia, it should be academia. I feel like it's like the grounds at which you're able to generate academic achievement should be how you're like invited to the college, and not so much like the pigmentation of your skin or the ethnicity that you belong to. But that's just me. I think it is actually good to have like diversity in colleges too. It just sucks that it's forced. Forced. Okay. What else? I think most of what I experienced over this last week though was like a culture and lifestyle, like levels of diversity. So in terms of dimensions of how you can measure diversity, I think culture and lifestyle were like probably the biggest changes between my own home style life versus how I was visiting, or how like all the friends around me, plus like the general public culture and lifestyle that they live. So while I was out, there were two ethnicities that were very common. Who like struck me as like bum characters when I was in public transportation. And those people creeped me out because I had no interest in being with them. But they clearly had interest in being with other people. And so I was like developing a theory about why like being with these people is just not why you would be so deterred from using public transportation. And I think part of that would be because, well, I don't know, when I was going through it, I was reminded that these people exist. And now when I think about public transportation, I have to keep in mind that there's people out there who are pretty undesirable to be around, and they'll try to navigate their way into your existence while you're trying to use the transportation itself. And so in terms of ethnicities, there was white people and black people. But I did see a lot of really well put together white people, and I saw really well put together black people too. Just ended up being that all the bummy looking characters were of those two ethnicities. And sadly enough, I think more of them were black. Either that or it was half and half. And it sucks. I hope, well, it's not that I hope. That isn't evidence for me being racist. I just think it sucks. That's all. One thing that I don't miss about public transportation is the weed smell. Smell that shit everywhere. Every opportunity, if someone wanted to do that, they did it. And man, that sucked. But these people ended up like, I don't know, there's some uncontrollable behaviors from some of those people. Like even today when I was trying to get on one of the shuttles, at the very first place where I needed to entry on, there's some guy with a bike just roaming around, and he was like, "Yeah, motherfucker, what you doing? Like, you see, bro, why are you looking at your phone, bro?" And I'm like, I'd rather not talk to you, and actually you're a waste of my time. So I had like this pretty aggressive impression. It's not impression, but I had this aggressive attitude towards this people that I obviously didn't say. And I think the reason why people don't usually say something that aggressive towards these people is because they don't have anything to lose. Usually. They don't look like they have something to lose. And that's why it's not worth it to engage with them most of the time. Because if you push them over the edge, they're more likely to do something drastic and criminal than you are. But I could be wrong. Maybe that's just a theory that's has no grounded evidence over anything factual. Okay, so I know I just said I have a very aggressive attitude towards these people, but I think what needs to be remembered often is that they're also living their own experiences too. And that's part of the hesitancy for why like I'm like skeptical of my own theory over that they have nothing to lose, because maybe they do. Maybe they're more prone to losing something because what they have is like not like as diverse as I have in terms of things to lose. So maybe having like one thing is whatever that thing is, whether that be like family members elsewhere, or perhaps they were looking forward to a friend or whatever. Maybe they were holding on to something and just it's like an unhealthy but singularly existentially driven reason for for themselves. So maybe they do have something to lose. And that's a very shallow thought that I had of them to assume about them. But yeah, if they're living their own experiences, then would it be selfish to say that I didn't want to like be a part of that? They're trying to live their own experiences by like having interactions with me. I do have a choice to say no. Naturally. I think everyone, obviously everyone has like a choice to say no. I think what's beautiful is that you get to share that with people who you want to share that with. Should you share that with everyone? You would share it with your friends. Maybe it's less meaningful if you don't have like the developed relationship. That's also a possibility. But to them, they don't have any developed relationships. Or maybe they do. Or maybe they don't. Who knows, man? But yeah, I just don't want to deal with them. All right, moving on. So, part of the cultures that I got to experience between the friends that I went and visited, most of them are of Asian descent. So that had some influence over some of the food choices that we had, and also how some of the houses, interior design, and artifacts were within the house, or within the houses, which is great. Also, lifestyle. Like, I know one of the families ended up like all sleeping together, which is great. It's just my family definitely doesn't do that. If I'm being honest, some of the houses were kind of messy. And it's more that, and maybe they weren't actually. I've definitely seen like messier houses, like don't get me wrong. But I think coming from a house where like most of the public areas like are not necessarily public, but like the more public areas of the house are definitely clean. They're very spotless. And my family does like holds that value pretty highly. It's like make sure everything is clean before, like always anticipate guests. It's kind of the thing. Whereas when I was at like the friend's house, it always ended up being just a pile of this and that everywhere. But then again, like the size of the house was definitely smaller in comparison to mine. So the way that they were able to condense space or condense like items to a specific space was a bigger ask for them than it is of my family situation. But also going to another city with a liberal influenced political stance. So I was able to we threw around some jokes, whatnot, about hating on America. But I mean, part of them are justified, right? Like the gun stuff and school shootings is definitely terrible. I don't know how you can stand up for a country that has, well, I mean, of course, there's more dimensions than that, but a country that has like the most school shootings ever, mass shootings ever, across like any different country out there. It's a rough statistic. It's not even close. So, like, all these liberal states, also, or rather, liberal cities have very similar attitudes when it comes to the political sphere. I just happen to be a part of a group that like believed in that stuff too, and rightfully so. Um, One thing that caught me off guard was how touchy some of them were. I'm not much of a touchy person, and nor are any of my guy friends. We don't just like hit ourselves on the shoulders, do whatever. show affection like that. It's very foreign to me, but it was interesting to see that happen with other people. They definitely lived closer to each other. So that was another thing, is that like some of them are within walking distance of each other, but for me, like most of my friends are farther away. If I were to walk the same amount of time, or rather, if I were to drive the same amount of time, oh my God, Spencer words. The amount of time that they took to walk to each other was about how long it would have taken for me to drive to some of my friends. So having that like proximity, closer and proximity dynamic would probably change up how you and your friends like interact with each other, because that's honestly awesome. Being able to just like walk somewhere and then just meeting up with your friends at that point in time is great. Because that's actually what they do. So with the closer proximity, they also meet up a lot more with each other. And from what I noticed, they're very dedicated to each other as well. Friends stick together. That's what it looks like. Okay, so I have a last antidote, or we'll call it a night today. So I had like a spontaneous trip to Sacramento. And this was like of the last day. Like we had done a campfire the night before. I set that up, by the way. We went out to one of the beaches at San Francisco and we set up a campfire. It was a great time. There was a whole lot of other people who were campfiring too. So like we had that atmosphere. Unfortunately, it was foggy, so we didn't have too much to see. Like we couldn't look out over the ocean and enjoy our fire. But what we did is we had hot dogs. So we just heated them up over the fire. We had some s'mores, except for we didn't have the graham crackers. Thanks, certain person, for not bringing those. Yeah, we had some really good food, at least a lot of food. I was full by the end of it, and we had a great time. It was the first time anyone had ever done like a campfire. I had done campfires before. Actually, one other person in the group had also done campfires, but none of us have set one up ourselves. So that was the first time that I did it for myself, and I'll probably do that for my Washington group of friends. I've already taken a look at different beaches that also do campfires, so hopefully that'll translate as a activity that we do up here too. But yeah, back to the Sacramento trip. It was spontaneous the day after the campfire. I pretty much got information at like 9 at night, and then we went out to we confirmed doing it like the night of too, and then we pretty much went out like the next day. So we went over to the Sacramento. To be honest, we didn't really see too much. Like in terms of the actual Sacramento experience, it's hard to determine like what a city has to offer if you haven't actually like seen the majority of stuff, you know. So we went out to like a coffee shop, which was great. And then we went over to or rather first we started off at a Korean barbecue place. That was the first time I ever went, which was great. I thought it was amazing. Korean barbecue place, then coffee, and then what did we do? Why am I forgetting? Oh yeah, we walked out in like a mall, like a famous mall. So that was great. It looked like there was like some water activities, aquatic activities that we could have done. I just unfortunately I think we got there pretty late to do any of that, like with a full go, so yeah, we just went back after we visited the mall. But the reason why I bring up this story is because on the way back, the guy who was driving me and another friend back home wanted to drop me off like very, very far away from like my trip. Like if he had stopped at like a different station on the shuttle for the shuttle line, I could have been at my Airbnb maybe around like 10:15 at night. Okay, keep that in mind. He chose some place that was so far away that I got back at like 11:45. So I was inconvenienced at around like an hour and a half worth of time away from the spot that I should have been at. So I was super peeved. It wasn't necessarily clear how that ended up being like the specific position at where I was gonna get dropped off at. It was like inconvenient for me, and it was inconvenient to everyone else in the car because they had to, like, no one benefited from that solution was the problem. I don't know. I'm still not over it. I'm trying to understand. I just think it was I don't know. Like some people talk about like different events that happened in their life and say like what's done is done, but for me that just oof, that one felt bad in the moment. Maybe I just need time to still recover from it. But yeah, the guy went over to someplace far away out of like comfort, which is like okay. You know, you had to respect the comfort to some degree. But there was like, in terms of different stations that he could have gone to, right? We're talking borderline like 15 different stations he could have dropped me off at. He just needed one of those. But instead it ended up being the one that was like really far away. It was just hard. I don't know. It was rough. But I like to think that I generate solutions, and I try to be like responsible about how I generate solutions too. It's like if something that I say or something about my line of thinking is stupid, I'll admit to being stupid about it. But and like make adjustments when needed. I'll make the sacrifices if I do something wrong, or if I like inconvenience someone. But I just feel like out of the multiple times that I tried to convince him to just not go that direction or drop me off somewhere else, it just it was rough. He was very set on his solution. I think I'll probably just stop it off there. I definitely deal with other characters like that in tech as well. I've had some people who um, believe that their solution is the right one without actually going over the details about why it's right, or consider other ideas that may propose that their line of thinking isn't the best solution. And I think having those discussions are usually necessary for for optimal problem solving for the most part. But people don't, I don't know, it's a problem for most people. It's like not being able to understand the problem at hand is the actual focus of having a collective discussion about a problem that needs solving. I think I'm out of it, so I'm gonna try and wrap it up here. Sorry for the kind of weaker podcast material. I am also out of it, as I mentioned at the start. So for the reasons I mentioned at the start. So for next week, we'll see if I have like something useful, because I might just be. It's possible that I'm just out of it, like after my week of new responsibilities at the job. But that could also be something we're talking about, like maybe handling the stress and or workload is something that needs to be like discussed about with most people. I think you could generate some meaningful perspectives across, like especially if Alon wanted to join in or Isabel wanted to join in. We could talk about something like that. I am looking for a music album. I think I already referenced that. Hopefully I should have like an EDM album to be able to do a review with Alon with. And of course, thank you for the support as always. I'm sorry we didn't get something out last week. I think it just ended up being not the right time and not the right album. So hopefully next week we can get something out, and sooner than later. But as I already said, I might just be out of it. Okay, I think that about does it for me.